Today on Supernormalized, we talk with the excellent astrologer Cassandra Tyndall to decode significant astrological events of 2026 and probably of our lifetime. If you've been feeling like the ground beneath you keeps shifting, you feel unsettled in your feet, like old structures are crumbling while new ones struggle to take shape, then this episode is for you. Cassandra is here to explain why 2026 marks a pivotal turning point in our collective story and, more importantly, what it means for your personal journey. Listen to some pro tips on playing the long game for 2026 and how these transits will affect you and your life in this episode. Welcome to Supernormalized, Cassandra Tyndall. Cassandra, we're here to discuss the way the planets are going to affect everybody throughout 2026, whether you like it or not. And of the notes that you've sent me, one of the things I noticed was you're going to describe the moment as a peak uncertainty where we don't know what things will look like until the floodwaters have receded. Can you paint a
Yeah.
picture of what you're sensing in the collective right now? And welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. Yeah, well, where do I begin? Probably one of the ways we could explain the current moment. So what is it? Just prior to the solstice. And it's almost as though we're in this kind of birthing canal. They're pretty watery places, right? We've had a lot of water in the last, say, 2 months, astrologically speaking. And one of the ways I've been thinking about the moment is we've just had this inundation of water, of emotion, of cycles ending. And while endings can be very clarifying and renewing, they often have a little bit of heaviness before that newness and that freshness comes in. So, for example, break up with someone and there's just that little bit of kind of heaviness, but even if you know that it's time to move on. And that's sort of where the planets are a little bit now. In essence, the current moment, the waters have all but stopped. So for example, we've had a lot of rain, floodwaters, the sun comes out, but the waters they haven't fully reached their peak yet. And then what we're going to start to see in the next month or so is that they are going to reach their peak and then they're going to start to recede. And that's going to probably become more apparent around Australia Day. And the reason for that is Australia Day, which is January 26th, if you're not in Australia, is when Neptune moves into Aries. And so that is a cycle that hasn't happened for about 165 years. So this is new for all of us. None of us have experienced that. And so Neptune is a planet that is about smoke screens and mirrors, illusions and delusions, and that desire to escape as well. It can be a very kind of creative, mystical experience, but very untethered to reality, at least in the 3D. And so where it's positioned now is at the very last degree of Pisces, 29 degrees, which is what we consider in astrology the last degree of the entire zodiac, which is a 360-degree circle. And so come January, we're going to have Neptune move into the very beginning of the new cycle. So this is not just a new cycle coming, but there's also an extra symbolism of the end of the zodiac where we are right now and the new, like a whole new beginning. Now, Neptune first moved into Pisces in 2011, and then it moved back into Aquarius for a little bit and then came back in 2012. And so we're kind of wrapping up that particular cycle. And some of the examples of that, social media, digital streaming, a lot of spiritual, esoteric, magical practices, and, the general weird stuff have kind of become a little bit more mainstream. And so going back to the water analogy, Neptune in Aries is a fire sign. So it's very separative. It's very individual. It's very assertive. It's very impulsive. And so the stark contrast energetically from the water, which we've collectively been treading the water through since sort of 2012, we're going to have this dramatic wake up. A way to describe that is, for example, an excess of water going into rehab. I've been drinking too much. I need to dry out. And, for people who have gone through that process, or if you know of someone who's gone through that process, they are kind of reborn. They see the world differently. They're very enthusiastic and almost um, sort of born again in a way, and everything's new, everything's fresh, and they're just so excited for life again. But then we got to hold back a little bit. We can't just go at life at full throttle straight after that experience. So we got to sort of edge our way into it. But we are going to have a very different era of that water to fire. So water is very, collective and emotional and kind of heavy and lethargic. Fire is very separative, it's very dry, it's very hot. So those kind of qualities will come into the collective. So we can see situations that might be, Neptune is a planet of spirituality, faith, creativity, escapism. So, there might be sort of divine inspiration at the most positive, and then, of course, maybe sort of, religious conflict or idealistic conflict, because Aries is also a planet, or a sign, I should say, that's associated with conflict, aggression, and in the most extreme cases, war. So, we are in this kind of, birth canal, labor pains. We all feel it. We're kind of all but there, and we're just waiting. So
Mm.
as these waters recede, essentially what we've had a bit of Neptune in Aries already this year from March to October. So we got a little bit of not much, but we got a little bit of an insight. We have dipped our toe into that energy, but probably not enough to get a full feeling of what we're in for. So we kind of have this idea, but we've got to wait until these waters fully recede. Then we can kind of see what needs to be cleaned up collectively. What's got grown toxic, what's grown waterlogged, what's been sludgy, what swamps, literal or metaphorical, political, whatever, need to be drained. And because, that kind of, it's a great awakening type of energy at the best. I could talk about this a long time.
No, that all makes sense to me. And looking back upon that time that we got a taste of it last year, it was mostly peaceful, but I did have some parts where I went, "What? Where did this come from?" You know,
Yeah,
like like you said, sludge rising up and showing itself. So,
correct. Yeah.
yeah. Now we're going to have the Saturn and Neptune meeting in Pisces for the first time since 1989.
Well, they'll be meeting in Aries.
Oh, sorry, Aries. Yeah,
They're together in Pisces now, and they're very close,
yeah.
but they won't make what we call that official conjunction until mid-February.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
how does that, what makes that so significant compared to other alignments?
All the alignments are significant, but this one's just so interesting. So these are cycles. So just to kind of set the stage for people who may not really understand this so much, we're all quite familiar with the cycle of the moon, new moons, full moons, and the different phases of the moon. And so that's what we would call the lunar phase. Now, there's phases within phases. And so planets can also have relationships to other planets. And we loosely call those synodic cycles. So the planet Saturn, which is about sort of a little bit more the 3D reality, it's about structures and authoritarian or, structures of governance, control, whether that is what you need to do in the home, whether it's what you need to do in societies. It's about our responsibilities, about our limitations, and just sort of what we have to do type of stuff, that the brutal reality, it is what it is type of stuff. So there's that planet, Saturn, and then Neptune, which is one of the more distant planets. And as I mentioned, that's sort of, at best spirituality and religion and creativity, maybe not religion per se, but mystical experiences. So these two planets, they form what we call a conjunction, aka fusion. They come together every 35 to 37 years. So the last time we had this was in 1989. And that was when they came together in Aquarius. And so what these two planets, when they come together, so we've got Saturn, which is sort of the boundary. Now that boundary can be at a personal level. It can be at a level of borders, political borders, national borders. And Neptune has a dissolving quality. And so there's a dissolution, a dissolving, maybe feeling disappointed, disillusioned with the structures as they are. And these could be the structures within your life. These can be the collective situations. So Neptune comes along, and because it's further out in the cosmos, it has a little bit more of the dominant effect. And so it will have a dissolving effect of the structures, the borders, the boundaries, the limitations of whatever Saturn is doing. So last time we had this, one of the kind of hallmarks of the cycle was the fall of the Berlin Wall. So literally that wall kind of dissolved and it changed a lot of the structures of the way that we know Europe today. And countries that I grew up with sort of don't exist under the name that they existed back then. That's in essence sets up the scene for what we might be able to experience this time. Obviously, it's not going to be exactly the same because a lot has changed in the world since 1989. There's just so much newness in this decade. You can't really just point at one thing and say this is the thing. But the Saturn-Neptune cycle historically do show significant changes in politics, in countries, the way that people are governed, which is a very Saturn thing. And that's what we're going to experience in 2026 and, for the rest of this decade at its minimum.
Might we see in the energies of Saturn affecting, say, the US or Australia, for example?
Well, it's going to depend very much on each country. For example, Australia has one of the charts that's most commonly used for Australia is what we just refer to as the 1901 chart. And using that chart, we have a 29-degree Aries rising. And this conjunction's happening at 0 degrees. So essentially, this is happening in the first house of our nation. So obviously, we're both Australians. So this is going to really kind of change perhaps our national identity. We're going to have maybe a little bit of a disillusion of what that really is. Does it need to be more one way? Does it need to be more the other way? How it will roll is anyone's guess, and everyone will have their own ideas about that. The point is that it is shifting and it is changing. Australia also has while it is happening in the first house, we've kind of got more potent energies that are really pinging our chart this year. But it's safe to say that we are entering a cycle where energy around our national identity, how we appear, how we identify ourselves as a nation will be undergoing some significant changes. We'll probably see those very potently over the next 2 to 2.5 years. Neptune is going to spend about 14 years. So we sort of got to think longer term with that. And also too, our ascendant is so that's our rising sign, according to this chart, is at the very end of Aries. This conjunction that we see in February starts at the very beginning of Aries. So I think in the first 6 weeks of 2026, the stage will be set, put it that way. I think it already kind of is. But we sort of won't get the peak of that until towards the end of the cycle in around sort of 12 to 14 years' time.
Right.
So it's essentially a decade and a bit.
So the stage is set, and if we look at the way the stage has been set so far, it's pretty dramatic.
Well, yeah, I mean, sometimes when you walk through the world and you're like, there it is. And I took my son to see a movie at school holidays and the ADF are advertising. So there we are. We've been doing astrology 20 years at this point. Sometimes we have to say things that we don't agree with personally, we don't like, we wish we didn't have to say, but it was one of those occasions in the movies. Astrology good, real life not good.
How does that a part of the cycle play out for the US, for example? What might they see?
America is going to be going through a cycle that is known as their Uranus return, and so that sort of peaked for them between July and November of this year, 2025, and from April next year, Uranus will return to Gemini. And so Uranus is a planet that is about volatility, disruption, surprises, shocks, and, explosions, disruptions, all of those kind of things. And even just the way that the US presents itself as a nation, that rugged individualism type of thing. And that's a very Uranus thing, sort of throwing your finger up to others and doing things your own way. And it sort of has a bit of a national identity, at least from the outside looking in, that is related to that. Now, for the US, that planet is going to be passing through their seventh house. Now, the seventh house in mundane astrology relates to your, say, political relationships, your open enemies, who your adversaries are. Now, as Uranus comes back to Gemini, it's going to be what we would call a return. So when the US was sort of born, obviously not born, but the chart that we use astrologically, Uranus is going to be coming back to the same place as this chart was incepted. And it is essentially, I don't want to use this analogy in a literal way, but Uranus is throwing a bullet in the fire. Uranus is dropping a bomb, a surprise, a shock. And that is potentially what we're going to see coming from the relationships, whether it happens to them, by them. That might remain to be seen. But I have seen some reports that there's talk about Venezuela, and I don't know enough about that to make comment, or I'm not informed in any way. But again, it's one of those situations where the stage is setting up for some of the volatility that we're likely to see collectively coming from the US. Uranus is going to provide a shock,
Mm.
and it's disruptive. And, sometimes, on the personal level, our relationship to change is always very unique. Some people are, come at me, bro, like I'm ready for this. And then other people actively resist it. And so we all have our spectrum of how we deal with change. And sometimes it depends on what the change is. Some are easier to go with the flow with. Others can really just throw you completely off kilter. And so I think one thing to be certain with Uranus, it is the planet of unpredictability, shocks and surprises, and anything can kind of go anywhere with Uranus. It is that proverbial curveball. And so it is going to be an energy that we can kind of loosely predict based on history, but which way that dice will roll, it can be in any direction really, because there's, as I sort of alluded to before, there are so many other cycles within cycles, with the sense of the whole shift in power, the shift in energies are moving in a whole new direction. And that started at the end of 2020. So we've had sort of 200 years of the earth element, and now we're moving through the next 200 years of the air element. And that's loosely, very briefly about sort of information. And that's kind of the oil of our moment, right? Data, information, control through the internet. And so that's kind of going to be obviously the natural resources and money and stuff, but also the disruption through the internet will be a thing as well. So it's
Yeah.
it's a lot.
I'm already starting to see echoes of that myself. I had Substack send me an email saying, look at this post. And I clicked on it and it said, well, first we need to video ID you. And I'm like, no, you're not. Bye.
Yeah. Wow. And I think this is something that, I think people need to be really savvy about, because now we have this new laws introduced in Australia with social media and things like that, and they're sort of rolling it out in stages. And this is an energy that really plugs into our country. It sets up a lot of energy around scams and fake stuff. If you want to access this, show us your face or fingerprint, whatever the case may be, and then it's not even a real thing. So it really does create a playground for, uh, not great energy there.
Like,
The first 6 weeks of 2026, strap yourself in. It's definitely going to be, as I said, those flood waters will start, that will reach their peak and they start to recede. And as they start to recede, we get to assess the damage. And the damage is, everything that's been swamped by water, everything that's kind of been the illusion, the delusions, the smoke screens, the mirrors, everything that's kind of, if you think about the flood waters, literally, they get pretty toxic underneath, right? And disease-ridden and rotten. Collectively, as our flood waters recede, we're going to see things, and people might be, oh, shit, people might be, got to do something about that clarity and that fire. So that whipping up of energy and impulsion. I feel that it's going to be a pretty dramatic start to the year. Now, on the personal front, this can be fantastic for picking up your socks and getting on with things that you might have been dragging your feet through up until this point. So personally, the energy can be very helpful for I'm not really a new year, new me subscriber because it doesn't really align with the astrology. But this year is actually pretty different. So Mars in January, the planet Mars, which is about our action, drive, goal setting, what do you do when your feet hit the floor in the morning? It's going to have its new moon, if you like. So it's going to fuse with the sun and be reborn. It's going to be reborn in the sign of Capricorn, and that's a place where Mars really likes to be. So the beauty of this combination is action, but with the long-term strategy. Not these short-term, I'm going to lose 5 kilos and then just, go back to where I was. It's like, okay, which is what we see, right?
Yeah.
Constantly. But this is kind of right, what do you want to do for the next 2 years? And it's a beautiful cycle because it's strategy in action, a long-term, short-term, and just sort of that. It's also got very strong military archetypes too. So we can put the left, right in our own lives, and we might start to see some of that energy play out collectively. Mars is very, very active in the first part of the year. And then, of course, Neptune in January, Saturn in February. They come together in February in the sign of Aries, and that is Mars's home. So it is, shooting
Explosions.
from the hip type of vibe, right? So that can be very, very helpful, in your personal life. If you're sick of your job, you finally take action for change. If you're sick of a situation in your life, like, right, I'm going to make this happen for myself rather than woe me. So it can be very clarifying. The energy of Aries, what I love about that energy, I'm a fan, I'll be honest, is that the glyph, so the astrological symbol we use for the sun is basically a dot in the center and a circle around the dot. And so what this energy can help us do is find our place in the center, right? In the chaos, in the change, in the unknown, and in the uncertainty. Where can we find our place in the center? You know how they say the safest place to be in the storm is in the eye? That's the calmest, at least. And so when we can kind of return to ourselves, our identity, our individuality, who we are, what we stand for, what's important to us, and then backing that up with some action, that can be really great for, personal goals and personal achievements and outcomes, because we've gone through our cycle now of feeling and navel gazing and, the kind of the inner growth, the emotional stuff, the healing. It's like, okay, well, what are you going to do with all of that now? And so that taking that fire, which can be very destructive, but fire is also the energy that heats our homes and makes our coffee and cooks our food. So it is a very divine spark. And so it helps us to return to that divine spark within. And who are you? And who are you amongst the crazy? And how do you want to really warm your life up, warm other people up? There's a sort of a bit of a legacy piece to the energy of fire, but this is the big energies happening at 0 degrees of Aries, the very start. And I mean, I'm not a mechanic, and I know cars are very different than what they used to be, but you know how we have that sort of ignition, and there's, if you turn the key, not that we turn keys much anymore, but the idea of the starter engine or there's a spark that kind of sets the motion.
Distributor. Yeah.
I knew you might have a bit more of an idea than me. But it's the match striking, right?
Yes.
And then you've got to burn the kindle, then you've got to develop the flame, and then by the end of it, you've got those white hot coals that are still keeping you warm by the campfire in the morning. And so the beginning of the year really is striking the match. And it's going to be a little bit wild. Are you burning through your kindle? Are you or are you kind of creating that sort of combustible fuel that will sustain you for the long term? So essentially, I think the first half of the year is very much about that. And then by the time we get past April, we're in the new normal, essentially. So we kind of know where we're positioned. Then the second half of the year, there's more fire, that's for sure, but a very different version of fire. So essentially, we have Jupiter change signs, and Jupiter is a planet of abundance, of growth, expansion. It's very spiritual, it's very wise, it's very life affirming. And it's going to be moving into the sign of Leo, and that's where the sun finds its rulership. So we've got more of that solar fire energy. The difference with Jupiter in Leo is it's what we call fixed fire. So it's very solid, it's very stable, it's very enduring. So if you think about the best version of a king is someone who leads firmly, fairly, has integrity, very sagely, priestly kind of like energy, not a tyrant essentially. So the benevolent king, that's kind of the energy that is possible with Jupiter. Then we have about 3 weeks later, the nodes of the moon will change signs. So we'll move into different eclipse territory. So the south node in Leo will join Jupiter. In short, that's going to be an energy that's going to be very refining. There's so much change. There's so much combustibility. There's so much aggression. There's so much change. It's just going to be a wild time. By the time we get to the second half of the year, again, there's more energy where we can come back to our center. We can come back to what's true, right, and integral to you as an individual. So we can sort of strip away the fanfare. We can strip away the excess and really get refined about what meaning and purpose looks like on the individual front. So it is kind of about maybe finding your inner goal, whether that's through spiritual practices, magical practices, astrological, religious, whatever, but finding this sort of divine spark within you and leading from that place and being less, the energy of fixed fire is less, it's less able to be manipulated and less able to be it doesn't blow in the wind. So if you think about, when you start the fire, it's kind of wild and unpredictable, right? The kindle's burning, might be burning too much. But the true test of a good fire is, when you're camping, is when you wake up in the morning and those coals are still white hot. And there's not these raging fires and flames, but the wood, the timber itself is like hot as. And
Yes.
that's the beautiful energy of Leo. It's the slow burn. So we're moving from the spark to the engine that will take you places where you want to go. So I think with 2026, as we sort of cross this threshold, it's start something, but start it with the end in mind. If you can't, so I'm going to use
So
an
you're saying
analogy.
like play the long game, really?
Correct. Yeah. So I see this every year and, I have a background in powerlifting, bodybuilding and all that. And people like to get on these diets and detoxes and new year, new me stuff. And yeah, they sound great. And I'll just turn around and say, do you see yourself eating that way in 12 months' time? And they'll be, oh no, it's only for 6 weeks. I said, well, don't do it. Don't do it because you'll lose the weight, then gain another 5 back, or 5 kilos, 10 pounds, whatever. So that's the energy of this year. If you want to, whether it's a financial goal, whether it's a personal goal, health and wealth, whatever your goal is, and it might be helpful if you know where the sign of Aries is in your birth chart, that's your starting point. And so, start there, but don't start what you're not prepared to finish, or else you'll burn out. And if you burn out, you've hit that proverbial wall and you're sort of no good to yourself, you're no good to everyone. So it is, again, as you said, the long game this year. And I think there will be a lot of impulse, a lot of temptation to start things really quick, come at me bro vibes, right? With all this Aries. And there'll be just this whipping up of energy, that sort of, how could I describe that? This sort of, Aries is a hot, dry, masculine fire sign. So this kind of energy whipping up, that impulse to act, that impulse to go, to drive. But if you don't have a destination in mind, then it's just energy with no place to go. And that's when it gets a little bit either dangerous or useless. In a sense,
Yeah. Well, if you got a lot of energy and you don't know where to put it, then it goes in the places that aren't effective.
Correct. Very well said. I know we sort of say this a lot in astrology. There are some years that are just, okay, it's another year. This year, I think, is going to be another kind of 2020 year where a lot of things change. And to be fair, we've all kind of we've been introduced to this cycle. We've had our dress rehearsal, and that was 2025. So you might think about some of features of your own life and how fast it's gone. I don't know. Everyone has said how quickly this year has gone by. And I think it's going to be even faster again. So what we're moving through essentially isn't going to be different, but it's just going to be, all right, we're here now. Okay, it's really happening. It's that sort of idea of it was funny, I was talking about it this way last year and then it happened to me. So you have to always choose your words carefully, but I likened it to the idea of moving house. So this year was, okay, we're moving house. And then you uplift all your gear, dump it in the new place. And you're excited for the new, but you've got to go back and clean up the old. What do I do with this old piece of furniture? Do I want it? Do I fix it up? Do I sell it? Do I chuck it? And that's kind of where we are now. Like, what do I do with all the old? And then we can't fully put our energy into the new until we've tidied up the old. And that, new cycle will start to roll out in the first 6 weeks of the year.
Okay, so after those 6 weeks and people have settled into the year, what other major transits should we be looking out for and to prepare ourselves for?
Well, I mean, it's not all going to be completely
catastrophic.
No.
Thank God.
There are, I think sometimes we can see beyond the veil, or we can see maybe cycles on cycles on cycles, and sort of not be just blowing in the wind of world events or what the news is telling us and what the government is doing, So there's a lot of energy that is going to continue in the first half of 2026 that's going to help us nurture and incubate our inner wisdom. And that's thanks to Jupiter in Cancer. And so Jupiter in Cancer will continue until June 30. It first arrived in early June, maybe June 10 of this year. And this is a cycle where Jupiter is at its best. And so while there's a lot of change in the air, it's in motion. I can name the dates and the exact transits and things, but in essence, we're in it now. Like, let's be real. But Jupiter in Cancer helps remind us it's a very gestational type of transit, and it comes around every 12 years. And there will be one area of your life where you feel the need to nurture it, to protect it, to grow it. And that's going to be the sagely wisdom, the inner compass, the guidance that's going to help inform your path moving forward. So Jupiter in Cancer is very nurturing, it's very protective. And when people know a little bit about astrology or they're dabbling in astrology, they see a really great transit like Jupiter in Cancer, because on paper, it's kind of the best that we can get. But we can't really get external results from a very feminine, yin, maternally protective type of sign like Cancer. That's why I use the analogy of, say, incubation or pregnancy. We have a cycle of pregnancy as women, as females, and, we know we're growing something, but we don't have the external result of it yet until the baby's born. And so there might be an area of your life now where you are nurturing something in your world that you're trusting that there's going to be a birth, or you're trusting that there's going to be a tangible outcome. And so sometimes the energy, the effort, the positivity, the upliftedness, the optimism, we don't always see the instant results. So there may be something about what you're building now, what you're protecting, what you're fertilizing, what you're nurturing now you may not be seeing those external results now, but you will as 2026 rolls out. So this could be, for example, your share portfolio. It could be a relationship that's just starting and you're thinking, I think this person could be a thing, right? And it's kind of growing. It could be your internal guidance system, your inner knowing, your inner wisdom, your intuition. If you're outsourcing your intuition to ChatGPT, like, maybe not. A bit of PowerPoint presentation, go for it, but maybe not your interpersonal things, and I'm seeing a lot of that, and, if you think about how we don't remember phone numbers anymore, we don't read maps anymore, and how that's changed us. I don't know, that's just a little bit of my thing there. But, pulling your energy back a little bit and what is really true for you in the most primal way. And that's going to be an energy that's going to kind of be underneath all of what we're experiencing in 2026. So as everything's changing, everything feels disruptive, everything feels a little volatile. And, there's going to be a lot of clarity come through, which is great. But some people are going to be okay with it. And sometimes clarity means we have to look at something we didn't want to see, something we didn't want to address, all of that kind of thing. It's not always easy. But Jupiter and Cancer will help pull our energy in and remember what's important. And I come back to the concept of the 3 rocks. You've got to choose your 3 big rocks in life. And for most people, it might be, their family, their career, and, a third thing. And once you fill that jar with your 3 rocks, and those are your primary focuses, they're your primary responsibilities, your reason for being, essentially, then everything else, fill the rest of the jar with the sand, but the rocks fill it, and then the rest is just cherry on top stuff. So Jupiter and Cancer can really help you figure out what those 3 rocks are. What's really interesting about the particular cycle that we have this time, so it was June 25 to June 2026, is that Venus, our other planet that's associated with goodness, opportunity. Jupiter and Venus are what we call our benefic planets. So they're more life affirming. They speak to ideas of things that are essentially good. And so Jupiter and Venus come together in Cancer twice in this cycle. So we had one already, and then we're going to have another one. It's going to happen in June. So to have that level of double goodness is actually really special, because the last time we had Jupiter in Cancer, which was 2015, we didn't get Venus in Cancer at all. We kind of get a double dose this time. And so there is something that can really help us, even though there might be a lot of damage, a lot of destruction, a lot of change, a lot of chaos in the world. Sometimes at maybe a more esoteric or higher purpose level, that has to happen so we can focus on the things that are really important to us. And that may not be what we think it is.
Yeah,
And
it makes you
so-
draw your energies back in and focus.
Yeah, exactly. So, and those things are going to be different for everybody, but most of the time it's the people we love.
Yeah.
Which is very kind of Cancer energy. Who is our kin? Who is our clan? Who is our family, essentially?
Yeah, for sure. Now, what are the retrogrades for the year that people should be looking out for? I mean, we've got Venus going retrograde and also Mercury retrogrades during this year. What's going to happen, and what should people be aware of?
Okay, so Mercury retrogrades, I know they get a lot of bandwidth these days, and those are regular cycles that happen every year. We generally get 3 Mercury retrograde cycles, and they tend to happen in elemental groups. So in 2026, the Mercury retrogrades all happen in water. So we get this real contradiction. We're in the process of leaving all of the outer planets, so the heavy movers, the big lifters in astrology, all being in earth and water, the feminine yin signs. And now they're all going into the yang, masculine, hot, fiery, airy energies. But then we have these retrogrades of Mercury that are all in water. So firstly, we'll have it in Pisces, Cancer, and then Scorpio. So when we look at Mercury retrogrades, they happen in cycles. So, for example, 2026 in water, the elemental cycles of Mercury repeat every 6 years. So you might, if you're a bit astro curious, you might look back 6 years ago and think to yourself, oh, okay, well, in what areas did I have Mercury retrograde issues? Now, Mercury retrograde is so much more than just IT problems, delays, frustrations, logistical, although those things always happen too. Well, not always, but often do. In sort of the more ancient philosophical thinking, the way that we see the brain now and the heart now are a bit different to how it was previously. And so the way I like to think about Mercury retrograde at a more spiritual level is how far has your mind and heart strayed from each other? And how do we need to pull them back in? And in the sign of water, water is about emotions, about our feelings, the quintessential conversation when you're trying to make decisions about that, the head and the heart, they often want different things. And then Mercury retrogrades can help us also realign. We get a lot of information, a lot of Mercury these days. The retrogrades give us an opportunity to reassess what's true for you, what's not true for you, discard it, and get back to a more head and heart connection. And that's got a bit to do with, the way Mercury works with the sun. February, March, June, July, October, November, they're going to be key months loosely to, okay, there's been a lot of change. There's been a lot of everything's different, and pulling your energy back again a little bit and asking yourself, what is actually true for me and what is aligned for me? And have I let information, data, narratives, propaganda, what I'm told to think versus what I know to be true? I think those are going to be very helpful and very potent energies to kind of counteract and counterbalance what the overall archetypes for 2026 look like. So I think they're going to be actually quite potent and very helpful for us in 2026, although it's still kind of the technical snafus and delays and frustrations will also be a thing. So that's the Mercury retrogrades. And then you asked another question about Venus. Was that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so we do have a Venus retrograde happening in 2026. She loosely retrogrades every 18 months. And like all the planets, they have a very sort of distinct cycle. Venus is very predictable in that way. So she has a repetitive retrograde cycle every 8 years. So the last time we had this was in 2018, the very same retrograde. With Venus retrograde, she will retrograde within a degree or two every retrograde cycle. So again, it's not new. And she's going to retrograde between 8 degrees of Scorpio and go back to 22 Libra. And that's a very repetitive pattern for her. And that's going to happen early October to mid-November. That's going to be a very personal transit. And I think Venus retrogrades are the most personal of the retrogrades because Venus is very, she's got a lot of objective meanings, but we experience her very subjectively. It's our likes, our dislikes, what we find attractive, what values we have, what is desirable to us. And when she retrogrades, it can be an upgrade of those things. You might discover, maybe I don't like that anymore. Maybe my tastes are changing in certain ways, or maybe I no longer want what I thought I wanted. Venus is a great accommodator. She's the planet that likes everything just right. It's a little bit Goldilocks as a general archetype. I mean, she's many things, but sometimes Venus retrograde phases force us to process, evaluate, and recognize the areas of our life that actually aren't as Goldilocksy as we might have thought. So it can bring up some relationship drama, tension, the recognition that maybe one partner wants something different than what they said they wanted 8 years ago, for example, or, and it doesn't have to be the death knell, of course. It can also just be the recognition that, okay, we got to change a few habits here. Our habits and attitudes and routines and rhythms have grown a little stale. We need to upgrade them. How are you maybe accommodating the needs of something or someone else at the expense of your own? With this particular retrograde cycle, she starts in Scorpio, where Venus is least happy in Scorpio on paper, but she's very potent. She's very powerful. She's not wanting something, you're going to know about it in Scorpio, right? It's not her favorite sign. But then she'll backtrack into Libra. And Libra is one of her home signs where she loves to be. So sometimes with relationships, you have a certain status quo, you have a certain way of things happening. And then sometimes you have to look beyond the surface, have a good look at things, and then return back to a new level of normal or a new way of being. So It depends. Everyone's a little bit different in their, relationship style, but this will encourage you. It may not even be in a relationship per se. It might be your relationship to certain things or what you desire, what's
Yeah.
important to you. And it's going to ask you to have a really good look and maybe a raw look, an honest look, Scorpio. Dig into the places that you might otherwise be a little afraid to go so you can get back to a more of a harmonious level, because Venus in Libra, she seeks harmony, but harmony and balance aren't always the same thing, right? This retrograde reminds me, I don't know if it's still a thing, but in HR, they used to use this term about the thermometer and the thermostat. Have you heard of it?
No.
Okay, so the idea is, for example, Venus in Libra, or the energy of Libra, is the adjuster. So
Mm.
she's the temperature gauge where she will adjust dependent on what the thermostat sets. So this retrograde is going to be this reconfiguration of the thermostat. If you're sick of always accommodating, adjusting, trying to create that harmony, but then you've got to
Mm.
ask yourself, is that actually true balance for me? And then having to kind of reset the thermostat to reflect the temperature that you want.
Right.
It's got to be a juicy one to end the year out, because we're all collectively moving through so much change. And then that means we have to adjust to that. And that might mean we have to adjust some of the trinkets and the trimmings in our life. It might mean we have to adjust some of the things that we find pleasure and joy in. It might be having to shift and change and adjust how we find happiness, pleasure, joy, the trinkets in life, and, relationships as a general archetype, not just the one-on-ones. And so, as I said, it's going to be early Scorpio, 8 degrees back into 22 Libra. So if you know what areas of your birth chart that is, that's going to where those upgrades are happening.
Right.
Obviously, there's the general idea of relationships, but if this is your work area of life, well, it might be what's your relationship to your career, your
Mm.
overall life direction. Are you working a job and then you're thinking, does it even mean anything to me? Is it even important to me? Or
Right.
am I just a cog in the wheel? Or, am I over identifying with my career rather than what's actually of value to me? So it can, we can have these general archetypes, but when you apply it to where it happens in your chart, then that's where you can kind of go, oh, okay, that's going to be the area that I'm going to need to figure out toward the end of the year.
Right. Right. Are there any other standout transits people should know about for this year?
Mm, yeah. All of them. Okay, so we do. I'm just got to try and remember when all of that happens. It's wild. The reason for that is because all of these outer planets, because they're all just shifted signs. Pluto in Aquarius, it's been in and out since 2023, but just over a year ago, November 24, as in 2024, it went into Aquarius and it stayed put. And Pluto's so slow. So it's only right now 2 degrees into a 30-degree transit. That's a 20-year mainstay. Then we have Neptune moving into Aries, Saturn moving into Aries, Uranus in Gemini. And because they're all in the air and fire signs, they're all making connections to each other. All throughout the year, there's going to be what we call trines, sextiles, and this is actually really historically rare, so rare. And even the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that we talked about, yes, they happen every 35 to 37 years, as I mentioned. But this particular one that we have at 0 Aries in 2026 hasn't really happened in pre-recorded history, since pre-recorded history. So we're kind of looking at Babylonian times, essentially. We can get these ideas and concepts. We can kind of get the dart on the dartboard, but how exactly it's going to play out, it's going to be sort of anyone's guess.
What might it look like? I mean, there's obviously echoes in history somewhere. So what did we see in the past? And was that similar at previous times? And should we say, okay, well, judging on that, we might see something like this?
Correct. So one thing that I believe to be true, because there's some discrepancy around, the approximations. And of course, the further back in history you go, it's, a little bit vague. But loosely, we could sort of say that the last time that this conjunction took place in the exact same position was roughly when humanity morphed from trading a goat for a pig to what are these silver coins? And instead of just trading this for that, I'm going to give you this silver coin for that goat,
Yeah.
right? So I often think about what that must have been like, the paradigm shift of how we value things. And we're moving into this phase where the digitalization of money, is it, yeah, and that rabbit hole, right?
Yes.
Is it going to be this whole UBI thing? Is it universal basic income, stable coin,
Oh,
whatever?
God.
Who knows? You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely going to be something that we're going to see. I think we're also going to see the slow, controlled demolition of democracy. Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to be optimistic here.
I don't even know what democracy is anymore. I mean, it looks like we're living
I
in a feudal
know.
state at the moment, but
Correct. I mean, a couple of years ago now, I actually did a YouTube video about feudalism and Pluto and Capricorn,
oh,
and a
yeah.
lot of people didn't like it.
Oh, wow. I'll have to go back and look at that
I
one.
just think it's the cognitive dissonance, right? So when you're born into a certain political ideology, religious, whatever, we're sort of also dealing with human delusions here. And that's a big part of the battle. And as I sort of alluded to before, people like yourself and people who are good majority, 99.9% of people who are listening, I'm sure, have that capacity to sort of take that step back and from the outside in and kind of see a bigger picture. And a big part of that is going to be the cognitive dissonance and the layers upon layers of things that have taken place. The last 200 years, we've had the elemental Earth era. A lot of people kind of get a little bit confused by that because Earth wouldn't seem very conducive to the creation of democracy. So, well, it wasn't really created 200 years ago, but it kind of really took a hold in the West at least 200 years ago. Sometimes we've got to look at things a little deeper astrologically, and it's the sign of the moon that is exalted in Earth, in the sign of Taurus. So in what we call mundane astrology, the astrology of politics and countries and things of that nature, the moon represents the people. When we go through an Earth era, it's almost the idea that the people become exalted. So now, over the course of the last sort of 40 years, as we morphed through to edge our way out of Earth and into air, we're fully in air now for the next 200 years. That began in December 2020. That era is gone, done. And some people don't kind of recognize that yet. We're now moving in the air of element, and that element was seated in the sign of Aquarius. And Pluto's, of course, passing through that sign, and the North Node will pass through in 2026 in the end of July. And that will just amplify and make that energy more hungry. A lot of people who dabble in astrology see Aquarius as this innovative, free-thinking, rebellious kind of quality. Not quite, because it is a fixed air sign. We're in the element of air now. We all have these things in our hands. We can form our own opinions. Anyone can be a broadcaster. Anyone can put their voice out there, right, wrong, indifferent, for whatever intentions they've got. So there's no more centralized Earth like media anymore. It's not mainstream. It's not, the source of truth. It's not the be all and end all anymore. And power structures don't like that. Power structures are like a hammer. And when you're the hammer, everything looks like a nail. At the moment, the internet is the nail. And so controlling the narrative, you can't govern a society that's free thinking. It's very difficult, right? So we experimented with that, and that's been the historical anomaly. And so now I feel that we're moving, we're shifting away from that dramatically now. And it's a wild ride.
It'll be interesting to see where it goes, and considering the severe push with AI, we're not even sure how far they're going to go with it, but it does seem like that's going to be one of the major parts of the going to see. So.
I agree with you, because already it's increasingly difficult to determine reality and fact from fiction with AI now, right?
I know what you're saying, but I can read I can read text and go, that's definitely AI. Or I
Oh,
can look
for
at a video and
sure.
then say, it's trash. This is trash, Or,
Correct. But not everyone could do that.
yeah, I suppose I mean, I've got 40 years experience in IT.
Well, this is it. Yeah, yeah. But, you know, your
Mm,
average person is probably just going to see it at face value and maybe not question it so much. I mean,
right.
I'm down for a cat AI video, but that's about all. They
All
make
those
me laugh.
animals bouncing on trampoline videos lately, and like, oh my God, people
Oh,
think it's
there's a
real.
cat podcast on Instagram that I love. It's so funny. Oh, but you know, it can be. It can be. But you know, we've got bands on Spotify now that are completely AI. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And so,
yeah. I think one of the last country songs to win an award was actually all AI, and people just still loved
mm,
it anyway.
yeah. So I think that might be the great rebellion moving
Mm.
forward. Is just. I come back to Prince's famous words, you know, you use the computer, don't let the computer use you.
That's wise.
Wise Gemini.
Are there any other transits that stick out that we should talk about?
Probably, I mean, there's plenty, like, let's be real, but I think those are kind of the main energies. It's the movement and the settling in of
Yes.
these new cycles. We've bought the new house, but we're still in the process of cleaning up the old one and we can't fully move into the new one. And as it is, you know how when you move into a new house, you know, you only see the potential in it. But then once you're in it, you start to see the problems and, oh, I thought it was going to be like this, but now it's like that. Oh, I'm
Mm,
going to have to fix this part up. Or, oh, this tap faucet for the Americans isn't working. And that's kind of where we're at
mm.
right now. We're still cleaning up the old stuff. Right now, we're in very fatiguing territory just with Neptune at the very end. It's like it's waterlogged, you know, it's
Yeah.
fatigued. We've had a Mars Saturn square and it sort of feels like a crawl to the finish line right now.
Mm.
You know, whether you're sort of looking at it just from the 2025 perspective or you're kind of looking at more the astrological perspective. But yeah, it's sort of the end of the marathon is the last few hundred meters is always the hardest.
Yeah, well, hopefully by the time this one comes out, people have gotten past that part. So,
Yeah, that would be nice. But, you know, I think there's a lot to be excited about in 2026. I mean, there's going to be a lot of stuff that is not going to be ideal. Like, there's just no doubt about that. But I think, again, as I've explained with the sun glyph, with the dot in the center, it's like, where do you position yourself in this? If you think about the sun, and we have so much solar energy in 2026, the sun is the centralizing and organizing principle of the entire cosmos. Everything revolves around it. When you can find your place in the center, and that's your non negotiables, this is who you are, what you stand for, what you do, then you're less likely to be manipulated by AI or manipulated by narratives or whatever the thing is moving forward. And so there is this sort of very awakening type of energy in that, especially after so much Pisces. There's been quite a few things, pop culture and the collective, that have really reflected that. I've been enjoying observing some of those things as well. So when you're guided in what to look for with the energies and you see it reflected back at you, like, there it is. So whenever there's sort of chaos and change, there is opportunities. The sky falling down idea is not going to help anyone.
no, I do admit I've got an apocalyptic sort of mind that does look for things to attach itself to, and
I've
the
been there.
well, I mean, the AI preys on that and sends me things on there's like doom scrolling, and like, well, okay, well, I better just stop doom scrolling this.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way. And then I saw something online. I'm completely against the whole digital ID thing. I'm totally for small government. Just stay out of our lives. Stop telling us how to raise our children, what to think about. I'm very staunch about that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
I did hear something that just doesn't change my attitude, has helped me to kind of reframe and think to myself, okay, right, just let's kind of put this in perspective. And not that I will be subscribing to anything from a digital ID perspective. We are kind of fooling ourselves if we don't think we're already in the system.
True.
You
I've
know what
thought
I
that for
mean?
years. Like, You think this thing isn't hacked already? I mean,
Yeah,
God.
I know, right? Yes, but I think, okay, we're already in it. Let's just be real about that. But
Mm,
again, we do have perhaps a little bit of people power in the sense of how far this goes.
that's right. You do not have to consent any further. It's up to you.
Yeah, yeah. And the sense that, it's not everything's ruined, let's just give up. And I think that's
No.
where the Aries energy will reignite the spark and we take back something that's been taken from us. And I mean, the technology is wonderful. Like, it's so wonderful. But the question is who's in charge of it, who's in control of it, and who benefits from it. And I think once we kind of grapple with that, then it will be a little bit easier to maybe not so much make peace with it, but just find the way we work with that.
What do you wish more people understood about astrology's roles during collective transformational times?
Or we rise above the stars. I'm a big believer than that. I think going back to the ethos of stars can impel, not compel. And we can have the weather report is the weather report. What that informs us or instructs us, do we pack the 50 plus sunscreen or do we take our umbrella? You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
God wouldn't have given us free will if we didn't have the capacity to rise above what the astrology um, that's just my personal philosophy. And I think so many people suffer from astrological anxiety because of it. After all this was happening when we were kids, Chris, we just didn't know. It just
Yeah.
wasn't in our
Yeah.
face. It just wasn't so apparent. And it's also good, but I think we always have to sort of, find our position in that. And, life does go on. And if it didn't, we wouldn't be here.
Truth.
Mm.
Yeah.
So we got the lineages behind us, and
Yeah.
and I think finding your faith in something is going to be a very big signature in 2026. And I strongly advise it's not in authority, at least.
I think it's more in community from what I've been seeing everywhere.
Yeah. People coming together and,
Yeah.
um,
Well, even if not by choice, being forced to because of their circumstances as well. I mean, that's what it seems like it's going to
that's
play out
right.
like. So,
I mean,
yeah.
we've seen it in parts of Europe. I believe Nepal, I think Tibet have done it too now.
Yep.
Bulgaria, Bavaria, like millions.
Yes.
And I think a little bit of that action is probably required in many places.
Yes.
Do you remember when COVID was the thing? And we're in Queensland, obviously, and so the border was closed. And
Yes.
do you remember that man that was on a horse and he just rode up like the man from Snowy River, galloping on this white horse, actually a white horse. It was kind of funny. And no saddle, nothing. And I don't even think he had a shirt on, so he was definitely the wild man from Borneo. And he crosses over the border and he goes, "Cross over the border, they can't arrest us all." And then he cracked his whip and off he went. It was like out of a movie.
Awesome.
And everyone's cheering. And it was just that was the spirit. That was that kind of airy, like an example of that airy spirit, reminding you that solar energy, you're the spark, you are the image of God, you are the centralizing force of the universe, and you have to shine that light out for something that's positive. That's why you're here. Why are you here otherwise?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
We're here for the adventure. Let's just enjoy it.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So, Cassandra, we've come to the end of the podcast and I've enjoyed everything you've said. It's been amazing again.
Thank you.
And I say again because we only saw each other a few weeks ago at the small conference that we went to.
We
that you
did.
held. Now, how can listeners find you and work with you? And
Oh, well, thank you. Well, my website is the place to go. If you're keen on learning astrology, I'm starting from the beginning, year 1 in February. I'll be opening enrollment for that soon. And of course, I give readings. So if you're wanting to really look at your own chart and where these energies are playing out for you and what you can expect from that, then of course, you're welcome to book in.
excellent. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, great. All right, I'll just say goodbye to the listeners. Well, that was a wonderful episode with Cassandra just now, covering all the transits, which are really major for 2026 and how they will affect all of us. Hopefully you've got some information out of that you can work with so that you're not so affected by it. You don't get the apocalyptic mind virus, which causes us to become stagnant in our actions. We need to be able to, as she says, play the long game and be effective at it. I'll provide links to Cassandra's website down in the show notes. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, remember to like and subscribe. And if you're on a podcast app, give us 5 stars and share this one to a friend that you think would really enjoy it. Thank you very much for enjoying this show, and you may enjoy these ones as well.